This episode of That's When I Knew the Podcast is brought to you by Jobski.io, the first career management platform built specifically for account executives. Whether you're active on the job search or just want to be aware of your market value, Jobski takes the stress out of career management by providing you with a unique seller profile that documents and showcases your skills as a seller. Head over to Jobski.io and apply for a private beta user account. Welcome back to another episode of That's When I Knew the Podcast, where real people have real conversations about the journey towards building a meaningful career in tech sales. Today, I'm joined by a very exciting guest. Let me actually take a step back and talk about how I came across this person that we have on the show today. I attended a webinar recently on compensation best practices for tech sales, sales operations leaders, sales management folks. It was really meant to help them understand the best practices for building their compensation plans. And the person that what we have on the show today was the speaker there, had so many gems, had so much insight into compensation strategy for sellers. I just felt that we had to get him on the show so we could have some of those insights for the Twig podcast audience. And just to give him a proper introduction, he started from the bottom and now he's here. So he's been an SDR, he's been an AE, he's been an SDR manager, he's been a director of sales development. So he's definitely seen it all, has a lot of experience. He's currently the chief of staff. He's also held the role of head of growth over at Quotapath, which is a software to help companies basically optimize their compensation strategy for sellers. So without further ado, Graham Collins, welcome to That's When I Knew the Podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here, Robert.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. I want to so obviously I told you a little bit about the show, but what makes this show unique is we bridge the personal and professional. So I always like to start off the show by giving the audience a little bit of insight into our guest and your upbringing. So if you don't mind, I'd love to just start there, and if you can tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your upbringing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in Maine right now, right outside of Portland, Maine, and I grew up in Maine. So I spent the first, 18 years of my life in Maine, in a little town, about 4,000 or so residents. My high school was about 600 people. So went to high school, like I said, a small school. That's actually where I met my wife. We've been together since we were 16 years old. So, yep. And our both of our parents still live in the same town that we grew up in. And we are now about 20 minutes outside of there. But I've had a few adventures in between. I'm back in Maine, but I did leave for extended periods of time.
Okay, where'd you go when you left Maine? Where were the first cities you kind of explored as a young fellow?
Yeah, well, I went to school. Yeah. I went to school in the Boston area, and Boston it's about 2 hours away from where I live and where I grew up. And I actually was in Boston yesterday for a conference, but so 2 hours is close enough. You also have Montreal to the north if you want to go up into Canada, but anything beyond that, you're looking at pretty extended trips down to New York. Or growing up, I also I grew up in Maine. My parents grew up in Oklahoma and Texas, and so I spent a lot of time in Texas, in the Texas Panhandle, in Amarillo. Just summers, getting used to the heat of the summers, and kind of a precursor to what I would get, because I did live in Austin, Texas for 8 years as well.
Well, it's always fascinating to me how our upbringings and like how we're raised ultimately impacts how we go into the professional world. So what were the careers that you were exposed to growing up? Like, what did your parents do? And like when you were growing up, what were your plans, as you kind of reflect back on your aspirations as a kid?
What did I want to be when I grew up? Yeah,
that's a long way of saying what you want to be.
I know, that's all right. My father is a physician. He's a neurologist, and so he specialized in multiple sclerosis. So I was around medicine quite a bit. My mother is a psychologist. She's a school psychologist, and my stepmother is also a psychologist. So I got a lot of brains around me. A lot of people talking about brains, and so growing up, that was I grew up in a very affluent, very white, upper middle class, if not upper class, area of the country. Maine is the whitest state in the nation, and so not a ton of diversity. And so I was surrounded by a lot of white collar professions and white collar people. So my dad's friends were mostly doctors, and my town was full of a lot of people who either commuted into Portland, or yeah, most people who commuted into Portland. So there's a lot of professional, lawyers and doctors and people like that. So I was surrounded by that. What I wasn't surrounded by until I reached high school, at least, was sales and business people, I guess, if you will. And so I had a teacher in high school. His name was Ozzie Holt. He passed away a few years back, but he was my business teacher. And so he was the only business teacher in our high school. He taught economics, he taught entrepreneurship, he taught several different business classes. And so he's really where I was introduced to the idea of, there are careers out there that are business, and you can make money in sales, and you can make money, not just being a doctor or a lawyer.
Well, that's awesome. Shout out to Ozzy. May you rest in peace. Your story makes me curious about something. So, uh, oftentimes, I've also had folks on my show who come from like the other end of the spectrum, where maybe they're the first time citizens, where their parents were immigrated here, and they're like, you need to become a doctor, a lawyer, right? And being that your family came from this, what was your family's kind of perspective and thoughts on you deciding to go towards this path of business and sales, right? What were their thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So, my grandfather, who lived in Amarillo, Texas, was a Presbyterian minister. So we also came from the ministry side, and so I went to school at a little school in the Boston area called Babson College, which is like 1,600 students, very small, but actually very diverse when it comes to, given that it's in Wellesley, Massachusetts, which is where like Tom Brady lived when he played for the Pats. And so like it's a very very diverse school. A lot of international students, about 20% international. And so walking down the hallway, you may encounter about 1 in 5 conversations not in English. And so going from where I was in Maine all the way to 2 hours south down in Boston, felt like a totally different world. And the other thing about Babson is that it's entirely business school. They offer one degree. You get a degree in business administration. And so going there, applying there at 18 years old, you're kind of, while I have friends who have gone into other subjects, engineering and whatnot, most people go out of it into finance or into accounting. And so for my parents, they were a little skeptical. They come from medicine and ministry, and hearing me say, oh, I want to go to, and this is, they may be able to blame Ozzie Holt again, but he's the one who introduced me to Babson and the idea of, well, business, and there's an art to that as well, and there's a way that you can help people with that as well. So I going there was a bit of a controversial move because I was locking myself in. My sister went to Syracuse. My brother went to a school called Rensselaer in upstate New York, which offered lots of different programs, but I had just the one. And so that was a bit of a controversial opinion. I think my dad said he wasn't sure how he was going to tell my grandparents that I decided to go to business school as opposed to pursuing something else.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's one of the pros and cons to sales, right? There is a low barrier to entry. Obviously, you went to business school and got your degree, but in the space of sales today, you don't necessarily have to even go to college, and there is that low barrier of entry. And so I think for a lot of folks, when they think of sales, they don't think of it as like the most prestigious or career. But again, the pros are it's an industry where it's probably the most diverse part of the tech space. Like, yeah, it's probably, I mean, more than engineering and other fields, like tech sales is where there's more likely to be more diversity because of the lower barrier to entry.
Absolutely. and I'm a big proponent of that. I always push people to remove college degree requirements on job postings for salespeople, because most of the best sellers I've ever worked with are not don't have a college degree. I'm fortunate that I have a college degree, but I've coached people and managed people who are substantially better sellers than I am, who went straight into the workforce or worked as waiters for a few years and then entered sales.
Yeah, most definitely. Now I want to touch on something because some people, so there's this idea of having a privileged upbringing, right? And you mentioned that you grew up in a great neighborhood, you went to a great school. Have you thought about like what the obviously there's pros to that, right? Like access, right? But have you thought about the pros and cons and like and what that means for you for not even just for yourself, but like in tech sales generally speaking, what the pros and cons could potentially be for someone who has a more privileged background?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that for a lot of people, there is a high expectation for them when they come from this background. And while that you called it out, there are people whose parents are first generation immigrants who probably also have a high expectation for them. But it's one of those things where you can feel never enough. Now, I'm not trying to woe is me by any means, but having my dad say, I'm not sure how I'm going to tell your grandparents that you're going into sales or going into business was, it's tough. And so hearing that, feeling like you're kind of the black sheep at times, can be difficult. But I mean, the cons definitely are there, but of course pros are also there. And I don't want to woe is me by any means.
No, you're
I think that
absolutely not. I mean,
there are things that in my upbringing, my folks got divorced when I was 12, which was a pretty bad time for that to happen to me, because it was also the time that both my brother and sister were going away to college, and so I was kind of all alone going through that. And so there are of course been things in my life that haven't gone perfectly, for sure.
no, life is complicated, and like I think the term privilege gets watered down a little bit. And when people say privilege, they're like, "This is privilege, white male," but like we all have our privileges, and so uh, no, by no means, this is a great conversation I think needs to be had because going back to your example, like of never being enough. If when I tell my parents I'm in tech sales, I can be an SDR, and they're like, "Wow," you know what I mean? So it's like one of those things. I read a book once, and maybe not SDR. My parents like I've been in sales for a little bit now, so if I told them I was an SDR, they'd be like, What's going on?" But
Yeah, what happened?
what happened? You were an AE just a year ago. No, but
Yeah, exactly.
but I read a book. I forget the name of the book, but basically it talks about like the pros and cons of being a big fish in a small sea, and being a small fish in a big sea. And it used an example of like how students graduating high school and going into a college that's like maybe lower ranked, but they're the top of the class, does more for their confidence. So now they're going into the world with more confidence and more just rigor, versus if you're like top of your class in high school, but then you go to like MIT and now you're a C student, for example. I'm oversimplifying this, but like that can do a lot to harm someone's confidence and momentum. And so I think this idea of privilege and is very, very complicated.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean, and I've seen it.
yeah,
I've seen it as well, where somebody has been given everything they always want, and then they get into the professional world, and all of a sudden it's like, no, you have to show up to work on time. Like, just because you drove to work in a BMW that was paid for by your parents doesn't mean you can roll up at 9:05. Nobody cares about that. I don't care about your pedigree once you become an employee for me. And so that's where I'm like, you can see that downside, where if this is
yeah.
the first job somebody's ever worked because they haven't had to. Yeah, how old were you when you got your first job?
I
No,
was
I'm
like
turning back on
14.
you. You're
I was
17.
14.
You're
14.
14.
I
Yeah,
was 14. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I went
And
door to
so
door
imagine
selling
being
newspaper
24.
subscriptions. Yeah.
Imagine being 24 years old and getting your first job. Like, I'm sure you learned a
Right.
lot in that first
Right.
that 10-year period that some people. I was 16 when I got my first job, but that
Yeah.
was because I was selling shoes. I've always been a salesperson, I suppose. But like
Yeah, yeah.
that's where you are. Um, yeah, where you have that, like, oh, it may seem like an advantage to you, but someone like Robert who's been working for 10 years when he comes into the professional world, the software world, versus somebody who it's their first job. I've had plenty of people who I've put on performance plans or even fired because they can't show up to work on time. Or I had one guy pour himself a Jack and Coke over lunch because he didn't understand that you can't do that in the professional world.
Jack and Coke.
Yeah. I actually take
Wow.
it back. I say Jack and Coke. It was actually a Red Bull vodka. And he said, well, it's Red Bull, It's just like other people drinking coffee. And I said, it's not because of the vodka. If you had a Red Bull, that's one thing. But
I would love to hear some recordings of his cold calls. Those probably are some funny cold calls. But I also, I mean, and that's why I say it's so complex because really it's about playing the cards you were dealt. Like um, I think it's obvious that there are certain advent, like you having a privilege, whatever privilege means, like having two parents, being white, being male, being upper class. There's these privileges that help you get a head start, and those. But it's all about how you play those cards. Like if you can play those cards very poorly and end up at the bottom, and vice versa. Like uh, Ruben, he's the founder and CEO of a company called Career Karma. He once said that coming from a non-privileged background is actually a blessing because that actually gives you the proof to show like God's grace and show God's like love, right? And this is more on a spiritual tip, but like when you show that you can overcome something, that like you're living proof of something that's bigger than any privilege, right? And so
no, I mean, I think that calling that out, like seeing somebody who did 2 years of community college and then transferred into another university on a resume, or seeing somebody who puts on their resume like, yeah, I served as a waiter for 4 years while I was in school, and then right out of school I managed a restaurant. Like I see that on a resume, and that goes substantially further for me than you got Yale on your education section, but no but nothing else to show for it. No jobs, no nothing.
wow, this is super insightful. I wanna transition a little bit into your career now. So uh, Mr. Ozzy, he put you on the path to tech sales and to business world. You graduate Babson. How do you ultimately end up in sales? And like, yeah, talk to us a little bit about how you even got to where you are today.
Definitely. Well, like I said, I started selling shoes at 16 years old. I was doing that at a local family-owned shoe store in Maine.
Quick question. What kind of shoes were you selling?
So it was the most boring shoes possible. It was old people shoes and kids shoes. So I
Okay.
sold like I got paid commission, and so I identified just where I could make the most amount of money. And old people, you can easily sell them $120 pair of
Right.
orthopedic shoes, and kids go
Right.
through them so fast. So you build up a following of people who love you,
Right.
and kids shoes are $60. 60 bucks. You
Yeah.
get paid 10% of that. It's easy to make money. And so it
Okay.
was nothing but kids and old people mostly.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Uggs.
Awesome.
I made a lot of money on Uggs and Crocs too, because this was
Oh
right
yeah.
in the peak of the Croc
I'm
world.
just now.
So
Side note, I'm just now getting on Crocs. They're pretty damn comfortable.
they're
They're
great.
pretty
I
comfortable.
uh, I know. I feel like people made fun of them, and then all of a sudden now in 2022, people are like, wait a minute, these are awesome. So
Yeah,
I'm
I've been sleeping on those.
Oh yeah. So yeah, that's what I did to all throughout high school, all throughout college. I would go back, and every winter break, every spring break, every summer, I would go and sell shoes. And then right out of college, interviewed for a job at a company called My Media Info, which has since expired. They got acquired actually, but I was interviewed for a full cycle sales role, and this was you'd mentioned that I had been an SDR. I actually haven't. I've never been an SDR.
Oh,
I went
okay.
straight into the full cycle sales,
Okay.
outbound cold calling, scheduling my own meetings, running them, closing deals. And so
Okay.
while I've never been an SDR, I had to do the whole thing, the whole
The
kit and
SDR
caboodle,
work.
all at
Was
once.
this a was
Yeah.
this a salary job or was this strictly commission or
So this
both?
was a base salary. I think that my base salary was $24,000 a year. This was 2011, and my first year I made like 55. So
Okay.
I did pretty well for me
Yeah.
on a $24,000 base salary. So
That's good money for someone fresh out of college.
yeah, I know. That's what I said. It's like infinity dollars. Like I just got paid infinity dollars. Like the first time I
Yeah.
got my fat commission check, and I was like, somebody just handed me $6,000. Like, what do you mean? That's more money than I've ever seen in my life. And
At
so
one time,
I've never,
yeah.
yeah. And so I did that for a period of time. That company went through a couple of acquisitions. Was acquired by Thomson Reuters. My division of Thomson Reuters was acquired by Nasdaq. So I worked at Nasdaq for a period of time. And talk about coming from a strange world into software sales. My buddy, who is still a very dear friend of mine, was a groomsman at my wedding. He worked with me at that. He got his job at the initial company off of Craigslist. So he got a job off of Craigslist, ended up working at Nasdaq for the stock exchange off of Craigslist. If you follow it through the acquisitions. So, but yeah, all throughout that doing individual contributor work. But I knew that I wanted to move into a management position and was doing the individual contributing, but kind of seeing how I could mentor and try to be kind of a team lead or a pseudo manager to folks.
Yeah. How did you make that transition from individual contributor to becoming a manager? Like, what was your strategy for that? There's multiple different ways people go about that, but like, how did you go about making that leap?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a hard leap to make. It's one of those where
It
like
is.
you have to have management experience to become a manager. Well,
Right, right.
how do you get that first level of management experience, right? And so
Yeah.
and so many people also think that management is the end all be all of sales, and I disagree with that. I think that people are. I always say, well, what do you want to do, next for when I'm talking to people, and they're always like, well, I probably move into management, and like that's the wrong approach for most people. Most people shouldn't be managers. You can make way more money as an individual contributor. I wish I'd stayed as an individual contributor. I would have been making substantially more money than if I was a manager, but I digress. I made that jump at I got tricked into a job interview at a company. I joke. I had somebody reach out to me and say, "Hey, I have this friend. His name's Max. He's new in Austin. I was down in Austin at the time. He's new in Austin. He's looking to make some friends. His fiance lives in San Diego, so you should meet up with him and have a beer or whatever." And I said, "Oh, okay, great." So I go and I meet up with Max, and we're in the middle of a conversation. It turns to work. We're 15, 20 minutes into our having beers, and I went, "This is a job interview." Like, I didn't even realize it. Like, I just got interviewed by Max, and so I interviewed with Max. Interviewed with a gentleman named AJ, who was the founder and president of a company in Austin called TrendKite. AJ, yeah, AJ hired me, and he says I'm the fastest person he's ever hired. So within about 10 minutes, he was giving me a job offer. And so I came from the industry. I really wowed him, and I'm still working with him today, almost 8 years later. So I guess I did something right. But one of my major negotiation pieces was I want to be a sales manager. And he said, okay, you will be. And I said, well, I need a guarantee. And so I had him write in my title as sales manager. And he said, you're not going to manage people right now. We have a sales team of two. Like there's no way. I was the second sales hire. You're not going to be the manager of one other person. And so I said, I know, but I want the title because that way, like, there's no question who's going to be the manager as soon as we build a team up enough. So
So then what you got the title, you were able to negotiate that. Did the Trinkite must have ultimately been successful? Time to hire more. Were you managing SDRs at the time?
no, so
Or
I was not. We didn't have SDRs. This was 2014. I got the title of sales manager. Was an individual contributor for
full
9 or 10 months.
cycle sales? Okay.
Yep, again, full cycle sales.
Okay.
Was an individual contributor. Closed a bunch of deals, which was helped bolster my case. And we hired on a team and started hiring more and more people. And then I think when we got up to a team of seven or eight, so what happened was I took over part of the team, and then the guy who the first sales hire, Justin, his name's Justin Papermaster. He's a good friend of mine. He took over the other half of the team, and but
Okay.
it was that uh, oft talked about and despised title of team lead, where I had my
Uh,
own quota as well as the team's quota. So I had to
yeah.
manage and player coach. I had to manage
Right.
and sell at the same time.
Yeah, I guess that's the best way to jump into management if you don't have the experience is to just like kind of work towards that, be vocal about your aspirations, and then sometimes you do have to take that player coach role in the interim. When you were in that player coach role, did you? And I know, yeah. When you were in that player coach role, did you lean more towards the individual IC work, or were you like, well, I'm a player coach, but I'm going to do more coaching than actually playing? Like,
Well,
what was your mindset? Yeah.
if you've learned anything about me by now, you probably know the answer to that is that I leaned into the coaching. I did. And so I leaned too heavily into it for a period of time. I was in that role for 18 months, which is a long time to do that. And so, but I spent way too much time coaching and not focusing on my own sales as well. And because of that, I think that held me back into moving into a strictly management position because my team as a whole would miss their quota. My reps would hit their quotas, but I would miss mine. And so, what do you know? My team missed quota. And so, because I'm not focusing on myself and getting my entire team to quota, I can't hit the team's quota. So, I think that actually held me back, and part of it was being able to split my time, saying, all right, I need to block 2 hours to do the IC work. I need to block 2 hours to do one-on-ones and whatnot. But I wish that I had done that earlier. But yeah, I leaned pretty heavily into the management side.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. So talk to me about how you ended up at Quotapath, right? And your first role at Quotapath was head of growth. So uh, that the growth title can be it's used in different it's used in different ways. Like what did head of growth mean at Quotapath? Like what were your responsibilities?
Yeah, head of growth meant we needed a title for me, is what it meant. And so we went,
Yeah.
all right, well, head of, it's a management style, right? And then growth, sure. Sales. So we skipped a step at Trendkite, which was I did move over to the SDR department for a period of time. Instead of trying to move into a sales manager, I went right from that team lead into leading an SDR team, and then built that team to a team of about 45 and became the director there. And so again, working with AJ Bruno, who's the CEO, founder and CEO of Quotapath as well. As soon as he left to found Quotapath, I stuck around Trendkite for about 6 months and said, I want to get back into the early stage thing. And so I called up AJ and I said, what can I do for you? And he said, I don't know. What can you do for me? Like what are your skills? We don't have a product to sell, and we didn't for a year and a half, almost 2 years. And so, what can you do? And so I remember scribbling down, a list of 30 things that I could do. Build a financial model. I'm kind of an Excel guy, so like build a financial model and like hold customer calls and do research on product. And I listed off 30 or 40 things, and I still have the list kicking around somewhere. But I sent that over to him, and he was like, "Okay, great. Well, that sounds good. I'd like to have you do a lot of those things. What should your title be?" And I went, "Well, yeah, I don't know, growth, I guess. Head of growth." We tossed around a few different ideas, but that was the one that felt the most right because it was mostly going to be focused on marketing and customer success and sales.
Nice, very nice. There's a lot of gems in your story too. Just how you approached joining AJ over at Quotapath. I'm sure he's like, yeah, what can you do? And like, you have an entrepreneurial spirit about you too. So that probably just was perfect for him. He's like, well, I got another entrepreneur on the team. That's what's more important than anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the things that they taught at Babson. So Babson's really well known for its entrepreneurship program. And one of the things that they taught was entrepreneurial thought and action. Now, you don't have to be an entrepreneur. You don't have to start a company to consider yourself an entrepreneur. And that's something that I stand by. Like, you can bring that entrepreneurial thought, what you think an entrepreneur would do, how you approach your day-to-day and your job. But the action is another important component. So entrepreneurial thought and action is something that I try to live by, where even now our company is 75 people, I think about like, okay, well, how can I become more entrepreneurial about it?
Wow, I would love to. I would love to dive deeper into this, the entrepreneurial mindset. But I want to also, because so at your current position over at Quotapath and what you all are doing, you have the privilege and opportunity to work with a number of top sales organizations to help them with their comp planning. And so I would love to like pick your brain on some of the, just the trends that we're seeing, best practices for compensation. I think this would be helpful for any sales managers, sales ops people who may be listening, but also to sellers, right? So, offline, we spoke about salespeople not understanding their comp plan. Like, what are the top two or three things that account executives should be looking out for when they're trying to understand that comp plan?
Yeah. So comp plans can be complicated. And so I do. I spend a good chunk of my day talking to our customers, prospective customers, random people who want to meet with me about comp plans. I've done over 350 calls with various different people, helping them build out their compensation plans. And almost none of them are with salespeople, but so much of it is about how to communicate it to salespeople. And so the number one piece of advice that I have for salespeople is read your comp plan. And I know that sounds silly, but like more often than not, salespeople are told what their comp plan is. They're told, hey, you earn 10% until you hit your quota, and then you earn 20%. But if you read the comp plan, you'll realize that there are generally other nuances to it. You know, you get maybe an accelerator for selling a different product, or you get an extra 3% if you sell a 2-year deal. Oftentimes the top performing reps are not the highest earning reps. I am pretty good at sales, but I always was one of the top paid people on the floor because I understood my comp plan and I knew how I could maximize that. And I did that by reading all 28 pages of my comp plan and asking those questions of my boss.
No, that's a gem. You don't necessarily the best seller isn't always the highest earner.
That's right.
Also,
Yeah.
we have
I mean,
to,
if you only
yeah,
sell one product, it's a little bit easier. But if you sell two products, you look at which one pays a higher commission rate, and if they pay the same commission rate, which one's easier for you to sell, or which one has the higher contract value. You got to do that math of like, hey, I can sell twice as much. I did this when I worked at Nasdaq. I could sell twice as many press releases as our software services, and guess what? I got paid the same amount, and it was easier for me to sell the press releases. So, do you think I sold any software? No, absolutely not. I sold entirely press releases and I made way more money than most other people around me.
right. That brings up an interesting point. I'm sure you have these conversations with your customers, prospective customers, though, that like organizations, it's their responsibility to determine what makes the best seller the best seller. Like if, yeah, like oftentimes what's important to the company is what'll determine, like, you as an individual contributor, you can't necessarily say I'm the best seller because every time I close a deal, my customers uh provide high NPS. No, like if the company wants you to sell this product line, or if they want multi-year contracts and your customers have high NPS, but you're not selling this particular product, and you're not selling your subscriptions or your deals for this amount of time, the company doesn't necessarily think you are the best seller. And in which, to your point, companies today are going to they're going to align their comp plan with what they believe is the best, right? So
Yeah. Like, what do you get paid for? What are they paying you for? Do those things. Those are the things they want you to do. A well-designed comp plan, like a well-designed comp plan should be gamed or should be hacked. Like this comes up all the time where somebody says, "Hey, I don't want my sales rep to hack my comp plan or game this comp plan." And I say, "But you're telling them to do that by building it this way. I don't want them to game the comp plan by only selling 3-year deals." And I say, "But you are telling them to do that. Your top sales reps should game the comp plan by selling only 3-year deals." And so what you want to do if that's the case is you want your reps to game the comp plan. You want your reps to maximize their amount of earnings because that means they're doing the things that you want them to do. So you build a comp plan designed around the things that you want them to do. They do them. What do you know? They're a top seller and they're a top earner.
okay, awesome, awesome, awesome. I had another question, another thought, but I think I'm gonna skip that one. What mistakes have you seen companies make when building their comp plan? Like, what are the common top one or two mistakes that you've seen companies make when building their comp plan?
Yeah, I mean the number one mistake is too complicated
It's too
because you
complicated.
need your
Yeah.
reps. Yeah, you need your reps to understand it. If you have five different commission tiers, that's fine. You know, you have five different commission tiers. Well, what if you sell three different products? All of a sudden now we have 15. Well, and what if it varies based on if it's an inbound versus an outbound versus a partner deal? You know, okay, all of a sudden that 15 is now 45 different commission structures. And like all of a sudden now your reps don't know what they get paid, don't know how to maximize their earnings. So what are they going to do? Sell whatever they can. And oftentimes that's not what you're asking them to do. You got to simplify those plans. Simplify and standardize. Those are my two biggest things: is standardize it, and this is something that we had talked about on a previous, actually on the previous webinar that you mentioned, is standardize your comp plans. You lay out exactly how somebody gets from AE1 to AE2. You lay out exactly how much they earn as an AE1 versus an AE2. You standardize that. It provides that motivation, and it equalizes it for it reduces the bias. It reduces implicit bias between sales reps. You know, hey, I like Robert. I don't care for James. You know, I'm gonna. It doesn't matter. James is a better seller. James should get promoted.
Yes, and you touched on that during that webinar and as well as offline about how the standardization of comp can help with fairness, right? And also help companies be more transparent. If you have a standardized approach that you can stand behind, it'll allow you to be transparent. It'll allow you to gain the trust of your people. You want to talk a little bit more about like just the fairness aspect of compensation and what companies should be thinking about in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I will get on my high horse about all day, every day. Is if you standardize your if you have different comp plans for every person in your organization, you will end up underpaying women and people of color. Straight up. That's just it's not intentional. It's just the truth. And that's you can look up all kinds of studies around that. And so if you standardize those comp plans and you make it transparent, you put it on your website how much the on target earnings is and how much the base salary is, well, then I don't have any wiggle room. I can't come in and say, hey, you know, I want to come in at a 90K base salary, even though it says 80K. Well, too bad. You know, go look somewhere else because we have a standardized plan that men are trained to ask for things that they want from childhood. You know, that's just if you look at it. Whereas women are not always trained to ask for what they want. They're not trained to ask for raises, and so men get raises. Same for white people.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too. It's like it's not you don't necessarily have to pay the most. I think what because I've been on the other end of this where I've definitely have been paid less than peers. And it really you can be paid a lot, but if you find that you are being paid less than someone else and there's not much differences, but beyond that they asked or that they knew or that they are buddy buddy with the manager, like that is what will like even if you are like happiness is kind of low key subjective and like I would my advice to other sellers out there is to definitely stay in your lane, like stay focused on what is in front of you, focus on what you can control, speak up, don't let it get to you. But yeah, to the employers out there, that's what's going to have you that's what's going to cause you to have disgruntled salespeople is like one because people are going to talk, salespeople are going to talk. It's just a fact of the matter. And so yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's something that
Transparency.
companies
You provide that
transparency
transparency, and then you
put some
don't have
thought into it.
the building of people behind. You know the talking about it behind your back, or you don't have to worry about hey, nobody's allowed to talk about compensation. Sure, talk about compensation all you want. You're wasting your time. I presented to you exactly how much Robert makes, exactly how much I make, exactly how much everybody on the sales team makes, and you know what? If you're jealous of Robert's base salary, here's exactly what you have to do to get to his base salary. You have to hit your quota 4 months in a row. You have to, do these six things that are all very specific and measurable, and you can get there.
Well, one thing you mentioned offline was this idea of like the con to transparency and how like the fact that some AEs are making some good money, and like that might be another reason why companies are hesitant to be transparent, because it might not even be internally within the sales org, but just externally, like marketing and engineering and like these other departments. They might have an issue with salespeople potentially making so much money. Do you have any thoughts there as far as like what the potential cons could be and why companies may not want to be as transparent?
Yeah, I mean that's a good call out, and it's no secret that salespeople get paid a lot. But I think that
Yeah.
when you actually present those numbers to engineers or people in marketing, it can be a a guffaw, like what? And so I don't I think that providing that
Oh.
transparency within the sales organization about the specifics is very important. But I
Yeah.
don't think that providing that transparency across the organization about specifics is super important. I don't think that you need
Right.
everybody to be able to calculate
Right.
exactly how much Alex made last quarter, because like that doesn't feel super great, because we don't provide that transparency across marketing, and we don't provide
Yeah.
it across engineering. I
Yeah.
think that the other thing is that in sales, it's high risk, high reward. Like,
That's what I was gonna say too.
yeah, I mean, you want to talk about getting fired quick? I've fired a lot of people.
Yeah.
It sucks. It's miserable,
Yeah.
but I've never fired anybody for reasons that they didn't see coming. They knew, hey, if I miss my quota 3 quarters in a row, I'm gonna get canned. Like, that is just
Yeah.
not something you see in engineering and in marketing. You don't see that. You
Right.
have people who, yes, have that maybe slightly lower. It's usually higher guaranteed, because
Mm-hmm.
half of your money is up for grabs. Not only do I get fired after 3 quarters of missing my quota, I also don't get paid after
Mm-hmm.
missing for 3 quarters, because
Yeah.
my base salary is not how I make most of my money.
Right. Right. Yeah. Sellers more often than not, it's like a 50-50 split. Um. Also, there's a lot out of your control as a seller. Like you can't control if somebody's gonna sign that contract. Like if you're an engineer, you can control how fast you code, what features you build, and like at the end of the day, as long as the company is making revenue and is well funded, they're going to continue to build. But as a seller, your money is like half your money is contingent on someone signing this contract,
Yeah,
and you
and
have to
then I mean,
convince them.
and right, and those people who, oftentimes those come from marketing, and they come from your SDRs, and they come
Mm-hmm.
from like the inbound that the marketing is doing and the product that the engineering team is doing. And so
Mm-hmm.
salespeople rely on so many other people within the
Mm-hmm.
organization to be able to do their job, and it's not entirely in their control. They have a good amount of control over it, but it's not 100% in their control, like you said.
Do you see a future where some organizations are offering 100% OTE? And so
I
no,
have seen this.
you
I
have
have
seen
seen
this.
this.
Okay,
I
okay.
have.
How does that work
I
out?
got into quite the heated, not a disagreement, maybe a disagreement, a discussion with one of our investors about this 6 or 7 months back. He has a portfolio company that is entirely OTE, and he said people sell like they would if they weren't, if they didn't. And they still have the, you have to hit these bars, you get put on a performance plan, you can get promoted if you sell more. And that's where I'm like, so is it entirely OTE? Because you can get promoted if you sell more, and then it's more money. Like, is that entirely OTE? And he said, well, they also get bonuses if they hit. And I'm like, all right, so this isn't entirely OTE. The risk is still there, the reward is still there. So I have seen organizations claim they do that. I've never seen an organization truly do it.
I'd be curious to know. I'd be curious if what the sales reps. So any sales reps, if you're getting 100% of your OTE guaranteed, shoot me an email. I want to have you on the podcast to hear your story. All
I want to hear it as well. Yeah. Graham at
right, cool.
quotapath.com. You send me an email too.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Let's
copy
let's
it.
let's make it happen. But yeah, it is interesting. I wonder if there will ever be, if that'll ever happen.
I mean,
A
I think
more,
that there is a situation where it makes sense, but it has to
yeah.
be that you have to build that kind of culture. It has to be the sales culture where you are just doing it for the good of the company, and you're just doing it because there is a level of motivation. Salespeople aren't entirely motivated by money. Like, we're not we're not vending machines. Like, we are motivated by pride and we're proud of our work. We enjoy what we do, and so there is that element. And so adding it in, you could have a situation where it's entirely OTE. I don't like it, but you could.
Yeah, and there is a difference from making like a lot of like if you're making 200K OTE, having that be 100K guaranteed and 200 guaranteed, like and every two like that is there is a little bit of stress relief that might come with that, and I can see that working well for some people. Also, a trend that I'm seeing is a lot more sellers are working on their personal brand, and they're being active on LinkedIn. This also obviously this is going to depend on what industry you're selling into, but like for you, like and any sellers that you have under you, being active on LinkedIn is probably a huge plus because so many salespeople and sales leaders are on LinkedIn. So it's like, how can you, does a 50-50 split even work for these people who are kind of also an extension to your marketing team? Like what is the comp plan for those type of people look like?
Yeah. No, I mean, there are a lot of people out there who are the face of their organization. They may be, I say only, they may be an SDR, but they're the face of the organization for a lot of things. And so, is it fair to say, yeah, maybe marketing budget needs to go towards that person as well?
Wow. Before we end the show, Graham, I wanna play a game. This is a game. I always do a game. This is the first time I'm playing this game. I'm actually
All
very
right.
excited about the title of this game. The title is by itself is super cool. So
All
the
right.
the title of this game is Paid Me or Played Me. And so how this game is going to work is I'm just going to give you a few scenarios and you just tell me if this company is this is a good comp plan or a good situation or a bad situation.
All
And you
right.
have to
I
say
like it.
paid me or they played you or they paid you. All
All
right.
right.
So this scenario number one is commission is only paid out if the rep achieves at least 80% of their quota.
Played. That's a played.
They played you.
80% of quota. Most organizations hope that on average their reps hit 80%. And so if you're not paying any commission below 80%, played.
Play, get out of there ASAP.
Yeah.
All right. Salary is 80% of the OTE for a company, but the company has greenfield opportunity and product market fit.
Man, I'd say play it again. I'd say play it again.
Okay.
Here's the thing about that. If you have 80% of your OTE is base salary, yeah, that means you're going to get that 80%, but that means that only 20% is up for grabs. And so if you hit 100% of your quota, you're going to get paid 100% of your on target. But if you hit 200% of your quota, guess what? You're only going to get paid 120% of your
Right.
on target. Whereas if you're in a 50-50, you hit 200%, you're going to be paid 150% of your on target. I don't like that. I know there are sellers out there who would like that. I say there is no such thing as or no sales rep believes themselves to be average,
Mm-hmm.
but because then they wouldn't be a very good sales rep. But your average sales rep, that's not good for them. I don't like that.
I like that. He broke it down. Broke it down. Okay. Here's another scenario. Above market OTE. So we're talking top percentile OTE, but capped commissions.
Golly. You Google capped commissions and you see my blog post. It's like post number 3 maybe on Google if you talk about this.
Okay, we're
Top
gonna link it to the
1%.
show.
I mean, I almost never am a fan of capped commissions as a part of an organization, but if I'm getting paid top 1% anyway, that's more than I'd make in an uncapped situation. Pay me.
Pay me. All right,
Pay.
pay me. Okay, I think I got a couple pay me's in here for you. So,
All right, all right.
accelerators for self-source deals and multi-year agreements.
Ooh, this is a 50-50 for me.
Really?
I got to be honest. One
Okay.
is a play, one is a pay. I like multi-year deals.
Okay.
Accelerators multi-year deals almost always. I encounter situations where it doesn't make sense, but 95% of the time, 99% of the time I say pay me. Self-source deals, that's a tough one because what that means is I'm going to spend more of my time on my self-sourcing than I am on an
Mhm.
SDR deal. I mean, it depends on how much, but like I don't want to dedicate time to an SDR deal unless it's way easier to close. Usually self-sourced deals they close at a higher rate than an SDR deal. Maybe not than an inbound, but that's my baby. And so I'm going to close it at a higher rate and I get paid more for it. Overall, I lean on the paid.
Okay.
Paid.
Okay. Ka-ching.
If
All right,
it's both things.
Here's the last one. And this one might crack you up. I'm
right.
also curious if you've seen this before.
All right.
In your
All right. Here we go.
conversations. All right. Clawbacks. You sign a contract with a company, employment contract that says they can claw back your commissions even after you leave the company. So they can. So if any of your deals churn or whatever, they can like file a lawsuit against you.
Oh, I mean, honestly, I highly doubt that would stick in court.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, sure, whatever. Sure, I'll sign it. I don't care. I'm not gonna.
Okay.
There's no way. Go ahead, sue me. But that is sketchy as hell. That is sketchy as hell because what that means is they've had this happen before, or this plan was designed by somebody who's very worried about paying sales reps. This means if I see that, that means the finance team built this comp plan, and that's a red flag in and of itself.
Oh, okay.
Played,
and you don't sign that contract.
Nope.
Awesome. Well, that's it for the show. Graham, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Really appreciate you sharing your story, as well as the insights that you've been able to capture over at Quotapath. Just, obviously wishing you the best on any endeavors that you have in the future. And thanks again for joining That's When I Knew the podcast.
I remember when the vision wasn't as clear. I don't think they thought that I would make it, but motherfuck they talks cause I'm here. Now we here for the taking, yeah. My God.